Hey everyone, just wanted to share some exciting news about what's coming soon. You're going to see our show, currently called Ask Ralph, getting a fresh new look and a name that I believe really speaks to what we're all about. We're going to be transitioning to Financially Confident Christian. And don't worry, it's still me, Ralph, and we'll still be bringing you that same practical, faith-based financial guidance every day to help you tackle debt, to help you build savings and grow your business and truly break free from the financial shame with confidence. And alongside the new name, you'll also see some brand new artwork, so keep an eye out for that. I am really excited about this next step and how Financially Confident Christian better reflects our mission together. I have more details coming soon. Hello there, are you ready to inject some financial wisdom into your Tuesday lunch break? This past week on Ask Ralph, we tackled the practical steps to start breaking free, from smart ways to avoid buying new to finally facing your debt head on and building that first layer of security. Today, we're not just recapping, we're going to dig a little deeper and answer your questions from the past week. So get ready for some real talk, some actionable steps, and the encouragement you need to build a life of financial peace and purpose. That's all coming up on the Ask Ralph show. But first, here's a quick preview of my new show, Grit and Growth Business. Ralph, setbacks keep knocking me down. How do I get back up? Well, let me tell you something right now. It's okay to feel knocked down. I've been kicked in the teeth. I've been punched in the throat. It's all part of life. It's all part of being in business. Allow yourself that moment. Then ask yourself this very difficult question. What's the lesson here? What's the lesson here for me? Because listen to me, every setback has feedback hidden inside of it. People miss this. You got to analyze it. You got to learn from it, then get back up and get back up smarter and get back up stronger than you ever were before. Building something real, something yours. This is hard work. Success isn't guaranteed. It's just not. It's earned through that relentless grit. But I see you. I see that resilience. I see that refusal to quit. Welcome everyone to this lunchtime edition of Ask Ralph. I am absolutely thrilled you've tuned in during your busy day for a deeper discussion into the principles that are leading us towards that joy of living below our means. Now, this past week, we covered some really foundational steps as we continue to tackle debt head on, but build some crucial financial buffers as well, and even explored the power of community. So for those of you who caught the daily episodes this past week, you know we moved beyond just those daily money-saving tips. We started digging into some strategies that require a bit more intentionality. And our goal today is to solidify your understanding of these concepts, address some common hurdles many of you might be facing, and really make these principles actionable in your life. So just to quickly remind everyone, here's what we tackled this past week. We tackled the often overlooked practice of borrowing or bartering before buying. We did that on Monday. Then we challenged our spending habits with the brand switching challenge on Tuesday. Midweek, we took a brave step by focusing on listing all your debts, followed by the decision of stopping credit card use on Thursday. Then on Friday, we celebrated taking action with making that first extra debt payment. And then we wrapped up the week by emphasizing the importance of starting the baby emergency fund. And I know for many of you, especially those of you carrying debt, these steps might feel significant and even a little daunting. But I want to encourage you. If you've taken even one of these small steps in any of these areas, that is fantastic. Remember, progress, not perfection, is the key. And speaking of progress and getting deeper into these topics, I'm delighted to have my good friend Craig joining me again today. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ralph. It's good to be here once again. Looking forward to a nice conversation.
Craig, we always appreciate your insights. They are certainly valuable. Well, let's jump right into our first segment. And looking back at the start of the week, at the beginning of last week, we talked about the idea of borrowing or bartering before heading straight to the store, especially for those less frequently used items. The core idea here centered on tapping into our community. Craig, I don't know if you've ever considered this, but when you think about the concept of looking to our community first, like friends and family, and I found this term, I had never heard of this before, called buy nothing groups. What initial thoughts come into your mind in terms of both of these and maybe some hurdles that you think people might face?
Well, it's a great idea. So we've talked about kind of rampant computer consumerism in some of our past episodes. You know, we're pushed to buy. But if you look around in your shed and on your shelves and that sort of thing, you got a lot of stuff that you've either never used or you've used once or twice. Maybe somebody else could use it. This is especially big for anything that you just need kind of once. So I'll give you an example. We had a big storm come through a couple of weeks ago, and I had a tree come down on part of our fence line. Fortunately, no damage to the house or anything like that. But if I need to chainsaw that, do I want to go out and buy a chainsaw for that one job? Now, fortunately, my wife got me one for my birthday a number of years ago, so we've got one. But what if? Do you really need to go out and buy, I don't know, whatever, $300 or $400 these
At
days?
least. I think you're going to at least
Yeah.
spend that much.
So there are a lot of things where you just need one off. You need this one time, or you're not sure if you're going to use it. So maybe you can borrow it. I'll give you a good example. My neighbor got in touch with me, his wife did, and said, well, she's my neighbor too, but her computer was dying. So I'm a computer guy. She knew I'm a computer guy. What should I do? And I said, well, you guys have iPhones and iPads. Have you considered a Mac? No, I hadn't thought about that. So, well, I have a 13-inch MacBook Air that's sitting here. Why don't you borrow this for a few weeks and see how you like it before you go pay the money for a new Mac and then decide, I really like Windows better. And so that's a great example. Who knows what you'll get, doesn't really matter. But there are all kinds of examples like that where we can loan something or reach out to some of our friends and borrow something to maybe save off a purchase or to make sure we're getting the right thing.
And Craig, that makes you an incredibly generous neighbor too. Like a lot of people just wouldn't volunteer that, but I think that's really speaks volumes about you, dude. I think that's really kind of you. Because you're right, because I went to change over to Mac like 10 years ago, and it was a bit of a change. I mean, I'm not trying to take a sidetrack here, but I think that's really a very valuable point here. Like, hey, I have this sitting around. I'm not using it right now. How about this? Now, we got a question in regards to this from Ethan. And Ethan wrote this, Craig, and I thought it might fit with your situation because I've never been to your house, but I'm betting it's a little bit off the grid a little bit. So Ethan said this. He said, I live in a small town where buy nothing groups aren't very active. What are some other ways to find people willing to lend or barter? And I thought, that's a really good point. Because, many of us, I live on a farm now. We got 30 acres and I've got neighbors, outside of that. But I remember as a kid growing up, we had the neighbors, and I remember as a young person, my mom would say, go ask Miss Jones across the street if I can get a cup of sugar. I know that sounds silly, but we actually had those situations. So Craig, what are some alternatives that Ethan might explore in less, quote, digitally connected communities?
Well, this may be a blessing in disguise. I want to take a little tangent here, if you don't mind. The buy nothing groups can be awesome, but they are also havens for scammers.
Oh, I imagine so. See, I never even heard of that term when I talked about that on this show. Like, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, they're big, like Facebook and, these different social media platforms have them. And I'm not saying they're a bad thing. I'm just saying you need to be really cautious. But, Ethan's probably in a church, his kids, or he go to school. You've got extended family. So anywhere you're in some sort of community, there's an opportunity to do this sort of thing. And I think, Ethan, I would advise you to get it started. If you hear somebody talking about something, kind of like I did with my neighbor, hey, I've got this thing I'm literally not using. Why don't you try it? And it'll build on itself. People will get used to that. And there are also a lot of smaller towns have swap meets. I know some radio stations, some small town radio stations literally have swap meets on the radio on like Saturday mornings. It's just Mrs. Jones has this and she's looking for that. So I think you need to get creative. But if nothing else, you can kind of get the ball rolling just by being a good neighbor, good community member.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know we have like the yard sales around here. And I've got a few clients that say, Ralph, I go to these yard sales and buy stuff because I can get it for pennies on the dollar. He said, the problem is I can't write a check for it. He says, if I get audited by the IRS, what do I do? I said, well, get a receipt from me. He goes, nobody wants to give me a receipt at a yard sale. I said, I hear you. But I also think, Craig, you also have to, let's take a minute and talk about this. I mean, there is some etiquette involved here with borrowing stuff. I remember my uncle was good for that. He was one of these guys that he would give you the shirt off his back, and he said most of the time they'd return the shirt with holes in it. So, the thing is, I think while we're here, we also need to understand that there is some etiquette. I mentioned this on this show. If you're going to borrow something for somebody, at least maintain it. I don't know how many, I'll give you a great example. There's about 20 years ago, we had a neighbor borrow a car from us. And our expectation was this is going to be, and we had an extra car at the time. And, a couple of days, well, it turned into 3 weeks. And I finally said to them, I said, hey, are we going to get our car back? And they're like, well, we're getting ready to take a vacation and we needed the extra room. So we were going to use yours. I'm like, wow. So again, there is some etiquette involved in this. So I just think you had to be aware of that. Have you ever had a situation like that, Craig, where you lend somebody something that came back not as you expected it?
No, that's really bad. You need to go to life lesson number 1. Don't be a jerk. But they were just shooting themselves in the foot.
Right.
The next time they need something, you're not going to be all that willing to help them out.
Absolutely.
So, but the classic one in Florida was borrowing somebody's boat and then returning it empty.
Oh yeah.
You always fill up the boat. You always fill up the car, whatever it might be. So yeah, just don't be a jerk.
How about bartering, Craig? You ever get involved in any of that? You started to talk about, well, I'm the computer guy, and I started to cringe. I'm like, I was wondering if you were going to become like what's that? I can't think of the geek squad. I'm not calling you a geek, but it's easy to become that. But I think there's a place for that too. If you've got to,
you could call me a geek, it would be okay and accurate. So yeah, I own it. I lean into it.
But you know what I'm saying? I remember, I think that's not a bad thing. My grandfather used to tell me a story. When he was a kid, his dad owned a mill. And it was an old mill that was alongside a creek. And what he explained to me is when somebody would come into the mill, they wouldn't pay with money. They'd pay with a portion of the corn or a portion of the wheat or whatever that was. And it was kind of like that bartering thing. You don't hear a lot about that. I remember probably about 25 years ago, it was a big thing around here. They had these bartering groups where, if I'm an accountant, I could barter with you and you do concrete work or something like that. And I thought it was kind of a cool idea, but you don't really see that much anymore.
I mean, I think there's some real downsides to this. And so let's break it down to kind of neighborly, informal bartering and more exchange-oriented bartering. So I'll give you another neighbor example. So we live down about a half-mile private road. And I've never maintained a private road. I don't want to learn how to maintain a private road. But my neighbor knew how to do it. Well, he didn't have a tractor. Every time he needed to work on the road, he'd go borrow somebody's tractor and come work on the road. And I said, I'll tell you what, I got a deal for you. I will buy the tractor if you'll take care of the road.
Hey, there you go.
And he was all for it. Now he's got a tractor. I mean, literally, he's got carte blanche whenever he wants it. He uses it way more than I do. Mm-hmm. He comes over, he built a big giant shed, came over and used the tractor, borrowed the tractor for as long as he wants, but it's been fantastic. We also trust each other. I didn't say now, you can only borrow this on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's like, no, man, it's yours. I'm just making the payments. Just treat it as yours. And he does. He treats it as his. And so that works out really well.
And see, that's the key. I think 2 things. I always say this to clients all the time. Number 1, in a bartering arrangement, there's got to be trust. And number 2, you have to understand value. And that's why a lot of times a client will say to me, well, Ralph, hey, can you take care of this for me? And I'll take care of it. I said, let's do this. You charge me what you would charge me. I'll charge you what I would charge you, because it just ends up preventing problems down the road. But I've just seen that happen way too many times.
And do you ever watch the court shows, People's Court?
Sure.
So that's what Tracy and I, when I'm working from home, we'll try to have lunch together and watch one of the court shows. Write it down. Write it down. So if you're going to get into these more transactional bartering situations, here's exactly my scope of work of what I'm going to do for you. Mm-hmm. Here's exactly your scope of work, what you're going to do for me. You got to lay out if there's any warranty, that sort of thing. To me, it doesn't seem worthwhile. I mean, because whoever you're bartering with some rare exceptions, they're going to overvalue their end of it and undervalue your end of it.
It's true.
So it's better to just say, I charge X number of dollars for this. What do you charge? Okay.
No,
and then if you want to just hand each other paid invoices at the end of it, not exchange checks, okay. But you got to lay all that stuff out because nobody goes into these kinds. Well, again, most people don't go into these kinds of things trying to feel like they've been cheated or feeling like they're cheating somebody else, but that's often the way it ends up. And if you don't believe me, invest a couple of hours watching the People's Court. And Judge Millian will explain it to you. So.
No, I agree with you. But the big takeaway before we move on to the second segment is just before you go and buy something, think about it a little bit. Can you borrow that? Can you find it in a used shop? You're only going to use it one time. I think that's a brilliant part. Well, let's move on to our second thing. In the middle of the week, we talked about where I issued, and Craig, you're going to love this one, dude. I issued the brand switching challenge. It's a simple experiment of trying to store a brand instead of your usual name brand for one item. And the thing is, Craig, how much marketing influence and our perceptions, the potential for savings is huge, but people are, they're scared to do this. Even on a few key items. What are your thoughts, Craig? Have you ever tried this yourself?
I'm the king of the store brand. So yeah, I'm always going to try to go with the higher value, less expensive item. I'll tell you where I do this a lot is in supplements.
Okay.
So I'm a huge believer in supplements. I take, probably a dozen every day. And so far it's working. Well, you'll see something on TV and then you go check the price of that thing and it's $35. And then you go on Amazon or Walmart or go online somewhere, find the exact same thing with the same active ingredients and the same concentration, and it's a third the price. Yeah. So this is especially true with over-the-counter medications. And do you remember in Ghostbusters, the little nerdy accountant guy that went on and on and on at a party about buying generic aspirin instead of Bankruptcy?
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
That's a bargain, yeah. But he's right.
But it's true though. Why are you buying the name brands? I agree with you.
And they often literally come down the exact same production line. They just get put into a different package.
Yep, absolutely. Sometimes it's the same package with a different label on it.
Yes.
But we got this question from Olivia, and I thought this was really good. Olivia said this, when I read this, Craig, I was like, this is hilarious. For things like paper towels or toilet paper, I've tried generic and they just don't seem to last as long. Is it really saving money if I have to use twice as much? And I thought to myself, well, both of those things are disposable, number one. So they're intended not to be reused. And I don't know too many people that reuse paper towels or toilet paper. I guess the paper towel, well, I'm not going to the other one, but we could say paper towels. I guess you could dry your hands and sort of set them out and let them dry like on the line. But what's your take on evaluating that true cost effectiveness of generic versus brand name products?
So I'm going to go down a path and you can tell me to stop if you want to, but
sure.
Don't cheap out with something like toilet paper.
I agree with you 100%.
It's just, that's not worth it.
No.
Paper towels, look, this is the more serious answer. Try it. It. If it doesn't work out, don't do it again. And so, you get the paper towels and you realize, well, I'm using twice as many paper towels as when I used Bounty or whatever the paper towel brands are, then go back to Bounty.
Right.
Or consider an alternative. They actually make reusable paper towels. They're not really paper, but you can get these things online for $10 for, I think IKEA sells them of all places. So like 10 or 12 bucks for a dozen of them. They're washable, use them over and over and over again.
It's like the microfiber towels. Like, you can buy a stack of the multicolored ones. Last time I was at Costco or one of the big, I don't know what you call them, the warehouse marts, I think it was like 35 or 30 of these things for like $10.
Yeah.
And like you said, you throw them in a washer when you're done. We use them to clean around here. Now, sometimes on the farm, they get a little too greased up. They go in the old rubbish pile. But
still, to answer her question more directly, well, if the generic doesn't work, go back to the name brand. Right. But I bet the number of times the generic works well will be significantly larger than the number of times it doesn't.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, it's all about that, it's that brand loyalty. It's that, and because you see the commercials, right? You just assume you're going to have to do that. So, Craig, you said you are I don't know put words in your mouth, but the generic king. So how did you get to that point? Was it just because you were very frugal from the beginning? Or did you have an experience where it's like, I just tried this and just try it yourself, it works? Or how do you get people beyond that fear of that inferior quality?
Well, So I'm naturally cheap. This is where we get canceled, Ralph. I'm part Scottish. So when Tracy and I started dating, we were talking about our background, and I told her, I said, I'm on my father's side and my mother's side, I'm part Scottish and part Dutch. So I'm cheap and boring.
I didn't
And
realize
so,
Scottish was a cheap thing. Like I never heard that
oh yeah,
term
yeah, yeah.
before.
Oh
That's
yeah,
a
yeah.
whole thing, huh?
Yeah, and they are a thrifty people, the
Yeah.
heritage is, and I inherited that. So,
Mhm.
I don't want to spend more money than I have to. And so, why should I give, my money to some name brand product to supplement their advertisements to try to get me to buy more of their stuff? If I can use a generic, I will. Especially things where it's exactly the same, like who would buy name brand alcohol? Like isopropyl alcohol. It's a chemical.
Right.
It's the exact same thing. So I just never saw the point in spending more money than I needed to. But
And
that's
Craig,
me.
you were talking about supplements, and one of the things that many years ago, my wife and I, we'd have great insurance. We had medical insurance, was sort of like one of those catastrophic plans. And we would go to the doctor, and I would say to the doctor, she would say, "Hey, I want to prescribe this pill," and I would get my iPhone out, and I'd be like, "Okay, let's talk about this," because there are generic alternatives, or maybe it's not a extended release or something like this. And I remember, and I'm not promoting this, but the Good RX app was great because I'd sit in her office with her, and I'd say, "Okay, I'm a type 2 diabetic," and she would say, "Okay, well, let's try this pill," and I'm like, "Okay, well, I never forget one time, Craig, you'll love this one. She called me in a new prescription for diabetes. And the pharmacist actually called me. And he said, "Ralph," he says, "I want to fill this, but it's $700. And I said, "Wow, for 1 month?" He goes, "Yeah, it's $700. And I said, "Well, that's expensive." He goes, "But I got an idea for you." This is a little bit off topic. But he says, "If you go to the website of the company that manufactures this, you can get 12 months for $25. I said, "What?" I said, "Hold on a second." I got my computer. I said, "Okay." I said, "What do I need to do?" He goes, "You just need to tell me you have the code." And I was like, "Are you serious?" So Craig, this prescription went from $700 for a month to, and I think at the time it was like $7 or call it $70, just so I'm not being, hyperbolic. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you tell somebody that? But see, you ask your doctor the same thing. Say to the doctor, "Listen, you're getting ready to give me this brand name prescription drug. Is there a prescription that is suitable that maybe I have to take 2 pills a day instead of an extended release?" But that's just another area where you can save money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think companies often prey on ignorance.
Oh, that's a truth, man.
People don't know about the situation you just mentioned, or they don't know that the name brand and the store brand are the same thing. They just don't know. And so I'm a big fan of taking control and trying it. You'll learn what to buy store brand and what to buy name brand, but you're throwing money away if you're always buying the name brand.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And my big takeaway here is just ask questions. Look in the store, go in, open, read the back of the label. Is it the same as the other one, but the other one has the fancy advertising, has the, the celebrities talking about it. And there's probably some legal ramifications to this. There's probably a certain amount of time that it can't be generic. Now, I won't talk about food, but I'm saying like medications and all that.
But medications, yeah.
But even in the grocery store, just compare the two, look and see. This is the same stuff.
Have you ever, this is a real tangent. Have you ever heard of cheddar whales? They're like goldfish. But
okay, no, I've never heard of that before.
So I buy stuff from nuts.com. They have good quality products. So I buy stuff from them, and I bought these cheddar whale. And they're just really, really, really good.
But they're not goldfish. They're not goldfish.
They're
cheddar
better.
whales.
That's right. They blow goldfish out of the water, by the way.
See, there you go.
Just for the record. Well, I was in the dollar store, and I saw this box of Stauffer's cheddar whales. And I thought, well, I'm going to buy these and see if they're the same. They are exactly the same product.
Wow.
I mean, they literally are. I'm not saying they're similar. I'm saying they are exactly the same product. So, you want to pay extra to get the fancy name and pay for the advertising or not?
I think you framed the key point here, and that is stop being ignorant. Move beyond your ignorance. I think you nailed it, dude. Like,
my father told me that so many times, but
No, but I think it's true. I think that marketers prey upon people's ignorance. And that's not being hurtful. That's not being mean, but just don't be ignorant. Well, let's change subjects a little bit. We'll move on to what we talked about on Wednesday. And Wednesday, we got a little bit more serious, Craig. We talked about listing all of your debts. And for a lot of people, that can be a significant step, often bringing a mix of emotions and darn near breaking people down. So, Craig, from your experience, what's the initial emotional landscape people navigate when they finally confront that full picture of their debt? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and this may not be something that's ever affected you. I can talk about it me if you want to, but I just wanted to get your initial impression of that.
No, sometimes the truth hurts. It just does, especially if you're in a situation where, in retrospect, through a lack of discipline, you've kind of let this debt accumulate. And I'm thinking about credit card debt, vehicle debt, those kinds of things where it's easy to get caught up in the moment. And, when you look at it right there in your face, oh my God, this is what the situation is. I mean, it's almost like writing down everything you eat. It's kind of, oh, okay, yeah, this is not so good. But it's a necessary first step. And I think that's the way to overcome some of the emotional or psychological barriers to taking this step. This is just a step. I can't improve the situation if I don't know what the situation is.
Yeah, you're right.
So
and
that's the way I would frame it.
That's the key. It's foundational. You can't move forward because if you're going to do this, you've already recognized I have a problem. There's a problem here. And you have to start there with that foundation. I know, listen, there was a time back when we first got married, my wife and I was in this position, man. I had more credit cards than I could name. And I remember one weekend sitting down and I said to my wife, I said, you know what we're going to do this weekend? We are going to sit down and we're going to write down every single dollar of what we owe to whom, so on and so forth. Because I said, this is just becoming a problem. And, it wasn't easy, man. It was like, we got to list this out and list this out and list this out. But it really did help us get to a point where we could make better decisions. Well, let's move on to our next question. And this one came to us from Caleb about this whole debt issue. And he says this, he says, I've got some debts and collections that are several years old. Well, that's never a good situation, but let's talk about that. Should I include those on my list and how should I approach dealing with them? Well, if you owe people money, I'm going to say, and I jumped in front of you, Craig, I usually ask you to answer, so I'm going to jump here in front of this one. Caleb, if you owe them money, you can pretend like you don't, but at some point, maybe they're going to file a judgment against you. They're going to come after you. They're going to wreck your credit. I think you've got to address all of these things. Craig, what is your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're still debts, so they need to go on the list. I mean, I'm assuming they haven't been discharged.
Yeah, we had to assume that because he's saying it's, they still, he still has them.
Yeah, and, debt collectors are no fun to deal with. But, pardon my language, sometimes you just have to suck it up and be an adult. Yep. And, you've kind of created this situation, maybe through no real fault of your own. Maybe it's medical bills or that sort of thing. But, trying to ignore it, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's funny, right?
It doesn't work.
I used to see this a lot when I used to run the credit union because people would come in and want to get a car loan. And they'd go meet with one of my loan officers, and a loan officer, we had this parameters where I had the loan officers could make a decision based on a credit score. If the credit score was over a certain number, they could sign the loan or for certain parameters. Well, if it was below this parameters, they had to come see me. And there was a couple times a day, they'd bring me a loan and they say, okay, Ralph, this one wants to buy a car. I said, okay, fantastic. Let me look at it. And look at the credit score. It's not great. And then I look at the debts. And for the most part, they made all their payments. But then there'd be 2 or 3 medical collections or 2 or 3, stuff that's just sitting out there, forever. And I'd say to them, well, listen, I said, this speaks character about them. When we did lending decisions, we had character, collateral, and capacity. Those are the 3 C's that we would look at. And I would say, okay, fine. The car has value. We're not going to give them a 100% loan. They have the capacity to make payments. They have a good job. But then I look at their character. And Caleb, you didn't ask this, but I think your character speaks volumes about this. If you want to have character, then list the debts and pay them. Now, listen, you may be in a position in this season right now that you can't pay them. Okay, that's fine. Make decisions about the debts that are right in front of you. Like, for example, if you need to pay your mortgage, I'd pay my mortgage before I worry about paying a debt that's getting ready to get charged off. Simple, yeah, absolutely. But at some point, when you start to get your head above water again, I think you need to go address these things. And a lot of people don't think about this, Craig, and it's a little bit of a sideline. You can call creditors and make a deal with them. The truth is, I've done this myself. When I've been in a bad situation, I call the creditor and say, look, I can't afford to pay you this whole thing, but here's what I can afford to do. Are you willing to accept it? 9 times out of 10, oh, absolutely. When can you pay me? I can pay you right now. Now, the thing you need to understand is this is going to be a tax issue. This is what I do. Where my tax at for a second. If you pay off less than the full balance of a loan, they can give you what's called a 1099-C, which basically says that, hey, you've got economic enrichment, fancy word for saying you made economic benefit because we charged this off. So just be aware of that. Because a lot of people come in at tax time and they'll be like, Ralph, I got this 1099-C in the mail from my credit card company. What does this mean? I was like, well, what this means is that, yes, you owed them $10,000. They accepted $2,000, so they wrote off $8,000. But now that $8,000, and there's a bunch of rules that go into this, whether you had bankruptcy or whether you're insolvent and all this kind of stuff. But think about that for a second, Craig. Yes, you're going to pay tax on $8,000, but the tax percentage is a lot less than 100%. And that's what a lot of people don't think about. So Caleb, one of the things you can do is call and negotiate a settlement with your creditors.
Well, Ralph, I know there used to be nonprofit organizations that would help with debt management. Somebody I know fairly well was pretty upside down and worked with them and got some substantial debt reductions out of it. So now be careful, because I know there are a lot of scammers in this space too.
Yeah, I've done some shows about that in the past. There are some credit counseling companies, but you have to be really careful who you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit here, but if you're facing this kind of situation, I know the last thing you want to do is spend more money, but getting with a CPA could be a really smart way to spend, a couple $100 just to say, okay, here's what my situation is. What is the best way for me to move forward? Because most of us, if we're in this kind of a hole, hopefully we're in it once in our entire lives. And we don't have experience in dealing with these kinds of things. And so you can go to somebody that deals with it day in and day out, and maybe they've got some ideas. Like I had no idea about the 1099. It makes sense, but I had no idea about that. They can keep you from falling into some traps. They can maybe talk to debt holders on your behalf, that sort of thing. But so it might be worth a little bit of money to get that kind of help. And then, Ralph, do credit unions ever offer these sorts of services?
So when I used to run a credit union, that's one of the things that sort of set us apart. Is I would have my collecting folks, or even I would sit with people and just sort of do what I called a workout plan. And there's a lot of value in that, because at the end of the day, here's my personal view on the world. I think most people want to pay their bills. I really do. And maybe that's a positive way to look at the world, but I think most people want to pay their bills. Unfortunately, a lot of people have dug a hole so deep they can't even see the way to get out of it. So there were many times, Craig, where I would work with a member, as we call them in the credit union industry, a member. I'd work with a member to say, okay, I know where you are here. Listen, I get it. You made some mistakes. Listen, we all make mistakes, but what's the end of what can we do to get you to a better place? And I would work out, it's funny because the examiners would come in and sometimes, I'd get written up for the stuff I would do. Like I would do negative amortization loans where, you're only paying me the principal, and not even that. Sometimes I'd take this a negative amortization where they're actually accruing more interest. And the examiner would raise cane with me. I say, look, okay, here's the deal, Mr. Examiner, Mrs. Examiner. I can write this off and I can lose $100. Or I can say to this member, look, for the next 6 months, pay me $50 a month. Yes, it's negative amortization. I don't want to get in the weeds, but that means that it's actually growing. The balance is actually growing instead of going down. Or I can write it off. And he says, well, maybe you should have wrote it off. I say, well, that's dumb. I said, because guess what? In 6 months, this member is going to have a better job. This member and I are working on a plan to make things better. They're going to pick up a second job. They're going to pay off this. They're going to pay off that. So absolutely. And people are foolish in that. Again, being ignorant. Go meet with somebody. I do this all the time, Craig. I call them workout plans. Now, sometimes I'm going to be very honest with you. I will say to you, your next visit after you leave here is with a bankruptcy attorney. because there is honestly nothing I could do. I had a couple in, it's probably been 6 or 8 months ago. And it's a bad situation. Husband and wife, the husband has dementia and the wife is really struggling with caring for her husband. And she developed a gambling issue. And she gambled through every last dollar of their savings. And she came in to see me. She goes, Ralph, what do we do? And Craig, it was almost the first time in my career, I'm looking at this and I wanted to cry because I had nothing to give them. And here's the saddest part of the whole thing. They had equity in their home. So they had equity in their home, but here's the problem. I couldn't even tell them to go get a refinance because they couldn't afford to make the payments. And then I thought, well, I'll have them sell their house. But here's the problem. Their mortgage payments were less than what they'd pay in rent. So there are times where I'm going to say, or somebody like me is going to say to you, listen, here's what you can try, but maybe your only option at this point is go meet with a bankruptcy attorney. And that's not something I push people into, but sometimes it's just a practical truth.
Well, and you can't discount the amount of stress there is in having this kind of thing hanging over your head. So sometimes it's better just to rip the Band-Aid off.
Absolutely.
And be done with it because, these situations can go on for year after year after year after year, and they take a toll on your physical and your emotional health. So
it's so true. It's so true. They destroy relationships. They decimate marriages. Yeah, again, and I don't want to keep on this, but I want to move on to the next topic, Craig, only because it's kind of going along the same lines of what you're talking about ripping that Band-Aid off. And we talked about this, what I call radical but essential step, and that is when you're carrying consumer debt, stop using your credit cards. You mentioned this a couple of weeks back about, I can't remember how you phrased it, but, when you're digging a hole, the first thing is to stop digging. Yeah. And so Craig, we talked about this on this show and, because it sabotages debt repayment efforts. And I've seen this time and time again. I'll have somebody to come in and they'll say, yeah, I finally got my credit cards paid off and now I got a little breathing room. And what's the first thing they do? We're going to go on a vacation. I say, well, how are you going to pay for that? We're putting it on the credit card because we have available balance again. And again, I'm not being judgmental. But Craig, what are your thoughts on that one?
I'm going to be judgmental on that one. That's just plain dumb.
It is.
I'm not afraid to be judgmental here. If you want, like you said, if you want to get out of a hole, stop digging. First thing you need to do is stop digging. And people don't, credit card companies have a little bit of evil in them.
They have a lot of evil in them.
I had a pretty substantial credit card bill because of business travel and other expenses. I tend to put most things on a credit card, always pay it off at the end of the month. And it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
The minimum payment was like $40. Mm-hmm. $40. I mean, it would have taken me, from now until the end of time to pay that off. I'm sure that the monthly interest would have been higher than that.
Well, absolutely.
And so it just keeps going up. And so people don't realize what's the average? We came up with this a few weeks ago. It's like 22% or something like that is the average credit card interest rate.
Yep.
You start doing the math. If you're carrying any kind of a balance at all, man, that interest, that's a lot. I'm not going to try to do math on a live stream.
But it's true. It's true. And it'll take you forever to pay it off. You never get ahead of it. But then we got this question from Sophia, and I want to get right into this, Craig, because I thought this was really a good point. And Sophia said this. She says, my credit score is really important for my job and my future plans. If I stop using my credit cards completely, will that hurt my credit score? And I thought, oh, here we go. Again, we're trying to justify the decision to stop using a credit card. Now, I will say this. I've mentioned this on the show many times. Your credit score is improved with good, positive use of credit cards. Yes, which means this. You don't charge more than 30% of your available balance. It's a capacity issue. You pay them off every month and that sort of thing. What are your initial thoughts? Like you said, you used it for business. I do the same thing, but I also have this mentality at the end of the month, that credit card's getting paid off.
No, that's right. They're always paid off, always. I think I'm probably going to forget one this month now, but I think in the last 10 years, I've missed one. Thought I'd paid it and I really hadn't.
That happens to all of us.
Yeah, it happens. But no, so this is a little bit of a tricky situation because there's a difference between not using your credit card and closing your credit card. So if you close your credit card, you have fewer accounts, and that can lower your credit score.
Big time. People don't realize that, Craig, is that will take your capacity and reduce it. And your credit scores are a function of the capacity and how much you're using them. If you close it, that's a bad plan.
Yeah. So I would not close it. You can, if you want to avoid the temptation, lock it away in your strong box or your fireproof box or whatever.
In the show, I actually said somebody recommended freezing it in a block of ice. And I was like, well, that's brilliant. Now, I'm not sure how the mag strip's going to handle that or the chips they put in there now. So I don't know about that, but
there's gives a whole new, here's a geek joke. That gives a whole new meaning to frozen assets, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was a real credit freeze.
But no, I think you need to be a little bit careful. Also, chasing the credit score is a weird game because, we kind of know how they work, but only kind of. Those are proprietary algorithms, so we don't know exactly what goes into the credit score. And I'll give you an example. I had a whopper of a credit card bill because of some medical expenses, cataract surgery, my wife and some other things. And it was a lot. But I knew it, I knew it was coming up. I had the money, paid it off. Well, it got up high enough to where my credit score dropped by about 30, 40 points.
Huh?
And then the next month, it's right back up to where it was or above. And so you want to keep it. Does it really matter if it's over 700?
Well, that's the thing. And I've done shows about this. People get hung up on, I got to have an 800 credit score. Well, guess what? Most lenders use tiers. And that top paper tier sometimes starts as low as 740, 750. And guess what? If you're above that, stop stressing about it.
Yeah, it does.
You don't have to be perfect. And like you said, there are going to be ebbs and flows in this. Like you said, you had that cataract surgery, you had other major medical, which pushed that amount that you were carrying over. So when the magical day hit, when they reported to the credit bureaus, it looked like Craig was a bad guy. But then all of a sudden, next month, Craig's a great guy again. Yeah. And that's the thing. You have to look at these long term. But there are psychological hurdles that people face when they're trying to break that credit card habit because it's so easy. It's so easy to grab that plastic and just say, well, you don't really have the money right now, but I could sure use that. Or, I'll get it paid off when the bill comes in. Oh, I've got 30 days before that bill is due. And then next thing you know, 3 or 4 decisions during the month, and you can't pay that bill at the end of the month.
Yeah. Well, and that's right. And that's why Sophia's question, the way it was worded, concerned me a little bit. If I stop using my credit cards completely, will that hurt my score? Does she mean stop leaving balances on my credit card? If that's her question, then no, it's not going to hurt your score.
Right.
If it's don't ever put anything on the credit card, that may not be the best idea. But,
right.
I just can't imagine it making enough of a difference unless she had some whopping credit card balances out there to where it's really going to make a material difference.
No, I concur with you 100%. Well, let's move on to Friday's show. We talked about the power of taking action. And what my key takeaway there was $20 extra could be a huge benefit to debt repayment. And we talked about making that small initial extra payment. It's so important in building that momentum in that debt payoff journey. Talk about finding even a little bit of extra money to put towards that debt. And we got a question from somebody named Noah. Noah asked this. He said, and Craig, we kind of beat this one up a little bit before, and I think this one kind of applies to you. Here's what Noah said. He said, I get paid inconsistently as a freelancer. How can I make consistent extra debt payments when my income fluctuates? Well, I thought about you, Craig, when I was looking at this question. Well, your income fluctuates. And, like you said, you get paid over a certain time, but if you found yourself in a situation where, you've got a debt that you're paying off, well, my opinion on this one, Noah, is just, okay, on the months that you can't afford to pay the extra, don't pay the extra. But on the months that you can afford to pay the extra, maybe you pay some more extra. I mean, it's not rocket science. What are your thoughts, Craig?
Well, and it really depends on how those fluctuations are. Like mine are periodic.
Right.
It's every summer I get nothing. So I know that's coming. It's really easy to plan if you're very seasonal like that. If it's, I have no work and then all of a sudden I'll get a job and then maybe I've got no work again where it's really not predictable, it gets a little bit trickier. But if it's predictable, be your own bank to a certain extent. When you're flush and the money's come in, take some of that, have a special account, pop it into that account. And I would literally have a separate account that extra money goes into. And then when you're a little short, you can pull it out and you just figure the extra payments into that whole math, that whole equation. And I think you can smooth that out yourself. If you're in something like commercial real estate, where you might get, $100,000 commission and then not get anything for 6 or 8 months, it's a little bit trickier, but I would turn to some of my more senior colleagues to ask how they've handled it, because he's not the only freelancer to face this situation. But I like your answer. If you're short, it's an extra payment. Don't stress over not being able to make the extra payment.
And that's why I talked in the show about the snowball method, the avalanche method. I'm really going to talk about it today, but both of those methods assume that you're going to make at least the minimum payment on all of your debts. And we can get into a whole philosophical discussion of, is one better than the other? Should you pay the highest interest rate first? Should you pay the lowest balance? And I think it just depends on your own mentality. But all of those things assume a very simple thing. You're making the payments, at least the minimum payments. So Noah, at least do that. And if you have extra, if you have margin, then do that. But I want to get to our final topic, Craig, which was all about emergency funds. And on Saturday, we discussed the baby emergency fund, that initial $500 to $1,000 saved before aggressively tackling debt, which kind of goes along with what Noah was talking about. And that's why I want to address this. And we got a question here from somebody named Ava. So let me pop Ava's question on the screen here. It says, I have a lot of anxiety about unexpected expenses. Would it be wrong to save a little bit more than $1,000 for my baby emergency fund just to feel more secure before starting on debt? And I have a really simple answer. Yes. Yes, absolutely. If you can save $1,000 instead of $500, yes, do that. Initial thoughts, Craig?
Yeah. Okay, do it. If it makes you feel better and you're making your minimum payments, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. Okay, shoot for $2,000.
Right.
But there is a little bit of a risk here, and I'm not sure. Again, trying to read into her question, if trying to save more than $1,000 makes it overwhelming for you, then I would not do that first. I would make them tiered goals. So start off with 500. Okay, you've hit 500. If it's going to make you feel better to have 1,000, then shoot for that next 500, and then maybe that next 500. But I'm just a little worried that if she's starting from nothing, trying to save $1,500 or $2,000 might just be so bad that it's like, oh God, I'm never going to get there. Why even bother?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I say to people, start at $100. Save $100. For some people, save $50. Because you've just alluded to the main point of where I want to go with this. And that's that whole idea of some people have higher financial anxiety. They just do. And like you said, it's the little wins. And that's why I call it a baby emergency fund, because that little win will help build that momentum. We've talked about this many times, you and I. But I think you start off with that momentum. But you're right. If you go into it with because here's a big takeaway. What I honestly say to people is have 6 months of disposable income in your savings. And I'll say to somebody like, okay, wait a minute, Ralph. Wait a minute. I make $7,000 a month. So you're telling me I need I need a lot of money. I said, yeah, in a perfect world, and you have all your debts paid off and you're doing everything financially prudent. Yes. And I'll say to them, actually, in a great world, have 3 years worth of extra money. I'm just being a smart aleck, but you know what I'm saying? But the problem is, you're right, Craig, it can be defeating for somebody who's struggling. If you say to them, look, a baby emergency fund is $500. Like, Ralph, I'm trying to figure out how to put food on the table today. I'm not even looking at $500. So what Ava says is great. Yeah. But I think you're right. You have to be careful that you don't set yourself up for failure.
Well, and I want to also bring up that there are kind of two sides to that equation. Maybe you build it by picking up a little gig work or doing something on the side, which can be a lot more effective than trying to cut expenses, especially if you really are down close to the bone in terms of your expenses. Sometimes it's easier to go, the fast food places. Not that I want to work in a fast food place, but if I was broke, I would. And, a lot of places, they're paying $15, $18 an hour. You do the math, it doesn't take long. That's like what, 6 hours,
Right.
7 hours to have that $100. And, I know you got to do take home and all that kind of thing, but before long, you could have that 500 or that $1,500. And when you're working, you're not spending as much money a lot of times too.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that's one of the big obstacles. I think people don't want to think about, they just assume, well, I got to cut expenses. Well, no, I say this to my business clients all the time. There's two pieces of the equation: grow the revenue or reduce the expenses, or do both. Both is great. But sometimes it's just a question of growing your revenue. So do you pick up an extra job? Do you ask your neighbor, hey, I see you need help with your yard work. Can I do that for the next couple of weeks and pick up a couple $100? You're right. And that's the thing that annoys me sometimes. I'll have people come in and I'll be like, I really just can't figure out how to make ends meet. I'll be like, okay, well, what are you doing after you leave here? Well, I got TV to watch tonight. There's the problem. If you've got margin of time, now listen, that's not for everybody. And that sounded like kind of harsh, but if you've got extra time, then you've got time to work. You've got time to go do other things. Now you have to be careful of that too, because like I had one client, and we got time, I'll tell you this story. So he decides he needed extra money. So he's going to go do DoorDash. Well, that sounds good. Sounds good, right? Oh, I'm going to make DoorDash. Yeah, but the problem is when you look at really, and I'm not picking on DoorDash, there's Grubhub, I'll just name them all, okay? But to be honest with you, it's really hard to make money with that. Because
income versus profit.
Absolutely. You can make revenue, what we'll call make income, but the profit is a problem. Because I said to him, hey, dude, yeah, you got a 1099 for $25,000 last year. That's great. I said, but how many miles did you put on your truck? And he told me the miles. I said, okay, let's multiply that time. The standard mileage rate, which isn't even covering all the expenses, in my opinion, was like 68 cents a mile. I said, you had 20,000 miles. I said, so you just spent, so we worked it out. He made $2 an hour. And I know it sounds harsh, but maybe there's some tip money in that and all that kind of thing. So, but I agree with what you're saying, Craig, and that is grow that revenue side, but just be careful how you do it. Because there's a lot of people out there that are promoting these, side gigs, side hustle things, which they sound good to bring in money, but they don't really bring in profit.
But you can get really creative. I'm with you 100% on that. But remember, if you're going to work for Uber, DoorDash, those kinds of companies, they're in it for their benefit, not for your benefit.
Of course.
But I've heard of people making some insane money picking up dog poop.
Oh,
now,
no
we live on ranches, so we don't have to worry about that. But if you live in a suburban neighborhood, who wants to spend their Saturday picking up dog poop? If somebody's, I'll come by, every other week, and for $50, I'll pick up your dog poop. It's here.
Yep.
Here you go. And there are dozens of things like that. Pressure washing, it's not that hard to do. The equipment's, a little bit of an investment, but not terrible. So that you can get creative. There's always money in doing things that other people don't want to do.
Well, and you nailed it, dude. Other people don't want to do it. So there's this mentality out there. It's funny. My wife and I talk about this all the time because we've been fortunate, just like you. I've been blessed. I have a good education. I'm good at business. But if everything went away tomorrow, who knows what could happen? Guess what? I'm going to land on my feet because I'm going to go figure out something. Might not be what I want to do. It might not be my dream job. It might not be what I've always wanted to do. But guess what? If you want to work, there's plenty of work out there. And it just annoys me. And again, we might get canceled when I get done saying this. If you want to work, there's jobs out there.
Well, I'll give you an example because I went through this decision-making this past year. So I paid a lot of money for somebody to maintain our lawn. So we've got kind of the lawn around the house, which is not like a suburban lawn, but it still needs to be cut. And fence lines to trim, that sort of thing. And then we've got the pastures. Well, I'm paying $200 every time the guys come out to mow around the house. And that's a lot of money. In the summertime in Louisiana, it can be $600 some months. I was talking to my wife and said, maybe we should just, I'll just do it myself. And, we'll get somebody to come out and maybe trim once every few months. And then she looked at me and she said, you are insane. Is that really what you want to be out there mowing constantly? You want to do more mowing? Just pay the money. Well, there's going to be somebody on that end of the equation. And that means that's an opportunity for you to go in and say, okay, Craig doesn't want to spend even more time mowing. So maybe he'll pay me a couple $100 to come take care of his property. And, A lot of people would. So especially, man, like picking up dog poop was like a light bulb. Not that I'm going to go out and do it, but it's not that bad. You don't have to have a big investment in equipment, and I guarantee you that there are lots of people that would pay you to do it.
Craig, I already know it. The Amazon fulfillment place near your house is stocking up on pooper scoopers, man. They are ready for you to make that move. No, but it's true. Again, you seize an opportunity, which kind of lands us where we want to end up. And that is, you've got to think about practical things and you got to think about your perspective. Both things need to shift at the same time. And, I just want to encourage our listeners, start implementing these principles. And you may feel a little overwhelmed at first, but these things build on each other. They really do. And so again, I really appreciate you being here. And I hope this recap and question A has been helpful. And my big takeaway here is pick one area, just one thing that resonates with you, and make a conscious effort to focus on it this week. And keep those questions coming in because that's what fuels the show. And you can reach us through our website at financiallyconfidentchristian.com. That's our new website. And now, if you don't mind, I'm going to close with a word of prayer. So, Father God, we thank you for your wisdom and guidance in all areas of our lives, including our finances. We ask for your strength and discipline as we strive to be good stewards of what you've entrusted to us. Help us to be generous, help us to be wise and courageous in our financial decisions, and may our journeys towards financial freedom also draw us closer to you. And we ask this in Jesus' name. So, Craig, again, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. We really get into some good stuff. And hopefully, like you said, we won't get canceled this week.
Yeah, hopefully not.
And if you're in the Louisiana area and you're looking for a pooper scooper, I'm just being funny. You can reach out to Craig. And Craig, guess what? I still don't like tomatoes.
You're so normal otherwise. So.
I hear you. Well, right. You guys, everybody have a blessed rest of your Tuesday, everyone. Stay financially savvy and let's continue our efforts to becoming financially confident Christians. God bless you, and everybody have a great day today.
Right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph Show. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.